everyone. Today we're taking a look at the first book in the Tome of Fire series, Salamander, written by Nick Kine. Now that name should sound familiar. I previously reviewed one of his earlier books, Assault on Black Reach, and his short story, which was leading off in the Legends of the Space Marines anthology, which was also based around the Salamanders. It is a little difficult first getting into this book. Although this is the first book in the Tome of Fire series, it feels like we're already starting off where another story has already ended. And without knowing the events of that story, it feels like we're playing catch up to try to figure out what's going on. And there are a lot of characters getting thrown at you. A lot of them have really tough names to pronounce. And I know it's not just me, I was asking around. And whether you're new to the Warhammer 40k universe, or if you're an old-time veteran that knows a lot of the fluff, it is still going to be fairly tough to try to get into all of this all at once. But as you keep getting through, it does get better. The story does start picking up. I was able to see more of the motivations behind all the characters. But it is still pretty clear that you need to do some of your homework on the Salamanders chapter themselves. It's not so much the general fluff with the Warhammer 40k universe that'll get you. It's a lot of stuff based on the Salamanders and their psychology and their special code and ethics and how they work. And then there's also two of the main characters in the story that you have to try to get behind, let alone a lot of the other minor characters which are trying to be played as main characters, but they're still side characters to the main characters. There is a lot you gotta get through, but let's start breaking it up now. Let's start with the premise. Now, right at the beginning of the book, the captain of the 3rd company of the Salamanders chapter gets killed off. Don't start crying, spoilers, it happens on the first page, okay? And there's a lot of debate over who deserves to be the new captain of the 3rd company. Somebody does get picked, but then there's a lot of arguments going between sergeants of that company whether this guy deserves it or not. At first, you might think it might be a power struggle, that some of these sergeants just might want to get ahead. But really, it's probably more about what's good for the company itself. And while they're going through this power struggle, they're also trying to hunt down one of their arch enemies, which they're essentially hunting down the Chaos Space Marines responsible for the death of their captain. Now let's start talking about the characters. I'm only going to mention maybe 2 or 3 of the main characters, because there's a lot of characters to go through, and really I don't have enough time for that. The main character that we're going to be dealing with is Thacker. That's what I'm going with here, okay? And really, he is the main character throughout the entire series. But he is sharing a lot of that limelight with his arch-rival, Sugan. Now, they're both sergeants of the 3rd company, and Sugan is definitely the most outspoken against their new captain. It's not so much that he dislikes him, he just doesn't think he's fit for the role of captain. And he just outright hates Thacker. So there's a lot of friction between those two. And you can tell they really want to duke it out, but they can't. They gotta be professional. And while Thacker, he's trying to ignore all the insults and all the grief Sugan's trying to give him, he starts moving on into his own. It's sort of like a spiritual journey of transformation that even he's not aware he's going through. From time to time, he's kind of getting these visions or feelings, or just kind of feels his presence. And to really kind of understand what's going on with Thacker, you really got to know the entire deal with the Salamanders, with their mysteries and prophecies dealing with their Primarch. And believe me, I could probably fill up 2 entire episodes just talking about their Primarch and their prophecies and mysteries. So I'm going to try to cut it as short as I can. Primarch gone missing a long time ago, left a whole bunch of junk for Salamanders to find. Salamanders are trying to find that stuff so they can find their Primarch. Now some of them believe that Thacker is kind of in a way leading them to some of these objects so they can find their Primarch. But nobody's really sure what's going on. Just that something weird is going on with Thacker. Now all the while, Sugan is having a lot of issues dealing with the grief of his captain's death. And in dealing with this grief, he actually becomes a masochist. And his toady, let's just call him Toad, is another squad member in his unit, keeps trying to push Sugan to try to take over control of the company and become their captain. That way, Sugan becomes the captain, then the toady gets some benefits. That's how the Toadies trying to move up in the ranks, just kind of being dragged on Sugan's coattails. So now you have Dagger, who's trying to deal with all this weird spiritual mystery stuff. Sugan is becoming a masochist and is kind of being manipulated by his own Toady into trying to take over the company. And an entire mess of the current captain trying to deal with his own insecurities. That being said, let's go on to the story. As I already mentioned, the captain of the dirt company dies. The space marine chosen to take his place is Nikeln. That's what I'm going with. You see what I got to deal with there. And even he doesn't think he deserves to be the captain. And he is dealing with some insecurity issues because he's still living in the shadow of his former captain. And the company as a whole is being fragmented a lot by this. Eventually they end up finding an abandoned ship while they're trying to hunt down the Chaos Legion responsible for the murder of their captain. And on this ship they run into another Space Marine squad called the Marines Malevolent. And even for Space Marines, these guys are just jerks. Really, it's kind of interesting. I recommend you kind of go to the Warhammer wikis to find out more about them. Isn't that really important to understand why they're doing the actions they do? I think it's explained fairly well in the book on why they're doing what they're doing. But really, check out their wiki. Those guys are jerks. And essentially, the Salamanders and the Marines Malevolent end up having a falling out on the ship. And while that's going on, Dagger finds a special box that seems to be relevant to the entire Vulcan mystery thing. So now they decide to take a break from hunting down that Chaos Legion and start putting their resources into figuring out what this box was all about. And in following the clues to this box, they end up crashing on this other planet. And if it seems like I'm glancing over a lot, I really am. There is a lot going on in this book. But just because there's a lot going on, it doesn't really feel like there's a lot going on. I know it's kind of weird for me to say that. But as I mentioned before, it is a little bit of a tough read. But this book definitely has its shining moments. If you could get over the impronounceable names, the sheer number of characters coming at you, and all the exclamations and lack of exclamations going through this book on the Salamanders and the Warhammer universe and what's going on with everything, I know I liked it, but I'll be honest, I did end up going to the Salamanders wiki, and I did end up looking up a lot of stuff. Nickheim definitely likes his characters here. There are a lot of, I guess you could say, Mary Sue characters, but they're not self-image Mary Sue characters. They're just a lot of characters that you'll be going on this entire journey throughout the entire series. So if anything, when you're reading this book, just remember it is part of a trilogy and it's meant to lead into the next book. And you do end up getting to know the characters. You do eventually learn the entire goal of what they're trying to do. And I did find the mystery behind what's going on with the entire Vulcan and the prophecy and stuff like that. I found that interesting. Now, I ended up getting this first one at the half-price books. Couldn't find the second two. But while going through this book, I knew I was going to want to finish the series. So I ended up going to Amazon and getting the other books. So I guess you could call that my recommendation for this one. But if you are new to the Warhammer universe, it is going to be a very difficult read. I would not recommend this one if you're new to the universe. Not unless you're willing to do some research on the story. If you're a Warhammer veteran, you still might need to do a little bit of research. But I really did like the entire overarching story of this book. And I liked what he was going for. So I guess you could say this is more of a recommendation. So join me next week when I review the second book in the series. Now that's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth.